Mihai Popoviciu is an absolute legend in the scene of minimal house music. He's getting millions of streams on his tracks, getting signed to huge labels, and I mean, his tracks are just lovely. Check some of them out. Oops, that last one is actually my track. Yes, that's right, because I'm not only a fanboy of his, I'm also a thief. I've meticulously analyzed every single aspect of some of his music and even remade it so that I could steal his best tricks for myself. And today, I'm sharing 6 of those best tricks with you. Let's get into it. Tip number 1. Mihai Popoviciu's bass lines are super simple and super effective. They're not too flashy, not too modest, they're groovy and they work. His bass patterns are usually no longer than 2 bars, so they're a bit repetitive, which I think is also what makes them so hypnotizing. And this track is just E going down to D, then going down to C. And the thing that makes it so groovy is this rhythm, where you put down a note, make 2 16th notes of empty space, put down a note, space, note. If we duplicate this over, you'll see that it overlaps. Copy that over again, and here you can see that he switched it up a little bit, but if you shift the rhythm a little bit farther, you'll see that it overlaps. So yeah, it's a common theme. He uses this rhythm a lot for his bass lines, and it's really groovy. And if you want to know how to design the sound of this bass, that's where tip number 2 comes into play. The second lesson we can take from Mihai Popoviciu is just how amazing, how good sounding, and just how versatile FM synthesis really is. In this track, he uses a few samples here and there, but a lot of the sounds actually came from FM synthesis. Let me show you. First, let's look at this plucky little counter melody. It's a very simple, minimalistic sound, but it fits very well. So I recreated it using Operator. And by the way, Operator is Ableton's default FM synth plugin. And in Operator, you have these 4 little oscillators right here. Yellow, blue, purple, and orange. And if you look here, these colors are represented here as well. This symbolizes the type of algorithm that Operator will use. And with this one that we have selected, this yellow oscillator will play, and it will get modulated by the ones that come after it. So if we turn up the volume on one of them, the waveform is gonna start getting modulated. And notice that different ADSR envelopes are shown for each oscillator, so we can actually change how it's getting modulated by each oscillator. For example, I can turn down the sustain right here, so that the frequency gets modulated only at the beginning, so that you get a more plucky sound. And the other thing that I added here was a little bit of reverb. And this exact concept is used for this counter melody here as well. Here it's the same setup, it's just a sine wave getting modulated by another sine wave. It's just that the settings on the ADSR envelopes are a bit different. The first one, the yellow oscillator, has a bit of a longer attack, so that it fades in a bit longer, it's a bit smoother. And on the other one, we have the sustain turned all the way up. There is also the glide setting being turned on. Pretty cool, right? Now, even the bass was made this way, and the bass is probably my favorite here. It's just a sine wave getting modulated by another sine wave. And the sustain on the second oscillator is turned down a little bit, so that we get this plucky sound. And that little FM plug adds so much punch to this bass, like it just doesn't sound the same without it. Tip number 3. Now, I want to highlight the attention to detail that Mihai Popoviciu adds to his tracks. There are so many little intricacies happening in the stereo field that it's like it's basically impossible to pinpoint them all. He especially makes sure to add a lot of little details into his drum loops. For example, there's this tiny little cowbell thingy. It makes the drum loop feel super immersive. By the way, if you want to get a bit of a closer look into this remake, just to go a bit deeper and learn a bit more from this track, I put the remake project files up on my Patreon page, along with some notes and a bit of a deeper breakdown, so the link to that is down below. I also love his attention to detail with filling out the track with little ear candies, like this little hit, for example. It periodically appears at pretty much random moments in the track. There's also this counter melody that we already looked at. Like, he didn't have to put that there, but he did. What a guy. Tip number 4. This is an insane composition technique and everyone should know it. I call it pocket theory. Let me bring all the chord stabs and melodic elements together in this track so we can see them right next to each other. So if you isolate only the parts where the hits actually play, you can notice that pretty much none of these overlap on each other. He finds pockets of silence in his tracks and fills them out with sounds. And this sounds genius when it's done with intention. Here's how the question and answer is going down. So this, I would say, is the question of this loop. And here, I guess, the two chords are reinforcing each other a little bit. But then there's the answer. But the second time around, the question is actually answered by a different synth. So this makes the entire composition feel very much like a conversation, and it's very engaging. If this principle of question and answer is still a bit new to you, I made an entire video dedicated to this exact topic, so I'm gonna link it somewhere up here if you wanna watch it. Tip number 5. Now, I might be a thief for stealing these techniques from him, but what if I told you that Mihai Popoviciu himself isn't such a saint either? Yes, that's right. He's actually manipulating you. He's manipulating you to keep listening to more of his music. But what do you mean by that? Well, I want you to listen to this melody. Now, if you're a smart little fella, you'll notice that this melody appears only during the breakdown sections of the song. It never appears anywhere else. And this makes your brain associate that melody with the breakdown section. Your brain literally makes a connection and anticipates it the next time it plays. This makes the track much more replayable and much more memorable. And in this part, when the breakdown section has a lot of energy and it almost doesn't feel like a breakdown at all, we still subconsciously know that it's a breakdown because the melody is present. So it also creates more contrast between the breakdown and the drop. And I think this is the exact reason why Mihai Popoviciu manages to pull off this next trick. That's tip number 6. So, Mihai Popoviciu's arrangements. Not gonna lie, they're shocking. Like, I was dumbfounded to find this when I was analyzing his arrangements. And I think there's a very profound lesson to be learned from this. I want you to notice how little he plays with the drums in his arrangement. They're present pretty much all throughout the arrangement. The stabs and the chords are changing. He's altering between different melodies in the arrangement. Sometimes he takes away the kick. But the claps, the hi-hats, the perks, the drums basically, the drums stay. Pretty much no matter what. The drum loop is playing all throughout. Like, it's the only constant in a landscape of ever-evolving elements all around you. It gives it this hypnotic and relaxing feel. And I'm not saying you should go out and do this exact thing in your arrangements. I think this is a very bold artistic decision, so it's definitely not for everyone. And on top of that, it's pretty hard to pull off. Like, the first time you try this, it's probably gonna sound a bit boring and a bit awkward. But here's what I want you to actually take from this. Mihai Popoviciu uses low contrast in his arrangements intentionally. He intentionally makes the drums fade into the background of your attention to make his tracks that much more relaxing and that much more hypnotizing. Contrast is the key word I want you to remember here. It's the single most important rule of arrangement I can think of, and most people don't even take a second to think about it. Mihai Popoviciu intentionally makes his arrangements have a low contrast, but actually, the biggest issue I keep seeing over and over again in people's arrangement is a contrast that's too low. This is an entire rabbit hole that I could get into, and like when I learned about it, it felt like I opened my third eye. Like I understood arrangement on such a deeper level. So if you want to learn more about this, I made what is pretty much an entire masterclass on contrast and arrangement. So click here right now to watch it, and I'll see you there. Cheers.